Imagine growing up hearing that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Teachers said it. Commercials repeated it. Your parents reminded you every morning. You never questioned it because it felt true. Later in life, you discover that this message began as a marketing campaign by cereal companies, repeated so many times that it became common knowledge. Or think about the idea that fruit juice is always healthy. For years, advertisements showed it as nature's gift, ignoring the high sugar content that rivals soda. Repetition built the illusion, and by the time you learned the truth, the belief was already planted deep inside you. This is where the concept of the availability heuristic quietly guides your thoughts. In the field of dark psychology, it is regarded as one of the most potent ways human perception can be distorted. It is not a complex manipulation that requires genius or malice. It is simple. When information is repeated often enough, it becomes easy to recall. And when something is easy to recall, your mind mistakes that ease for certainty. The lie becomes accessible. The truth becomes distant. Consider how you form opinions about danger. If news reports repeat violent crimes night after night, your perception of risk shifts. The world feels unsafe, even if statistics reveal otherwise. Or consider how rumors in workplaces spread. The more a name is whispered with suspicion, the more you begin to see guilt in their face, even when no evidence exists. Repetition makes memory vivid, and vivid memory feels real. This psychological mechanism evolved for survival. Your ancestors relied on rapid judgments. If they frequently saw a certain animal near danger, they assumed threat without questioning the source of the pattern. In the wild, hesitation could mean death. In modern life, however, the same shortcut often leads you astray. You confuse what you remember most easily with what is most accurate. Repetition does more than influence individual thought. It shapes collective reality. Entire societies have been swayed by repeated claims, transforming falsehoods into unquestioned cultural truths. Propaganda in history relied on this principle, not merely convincing individuals, but infecting entire populations with unified illusions. The more a slogan was repeated, the more it became part of identity. At that point, challenging it felt like challenging oneself. This is where the darker implications emerge. When repetition is used deliberately, it becomes manipulation. Skilled persuaders know that logic rarely wins hearts. Familiarity does. Repeated narratives bypass skepticism, embedding themselves into the subconscious until they no longer feel external at all. You stop saying "I heard it" and begin saying "I believe it." The boundary between memory and truth collapses, leaving you defenseless against those who understand how to exploit it. Pause for a moment. How many of your convictions are truly yours, and how many are echoes of what you have heard too many times to doubt? This question is uncomfortable because it shifts blame from others to yourself. The mechanism is not foreign. It lives in you. It is not only politicians or corporations who repeat lies. Friends repeat them. Families repeat them. You repeat them to yourself. This first seed of belief, planted by exposure and watered by familiarity, grows silently. By the time you notice it, it has already shaped your reality. You cannot undo repetition. You cannot erase the countless times your brain has filed something under true because it came up easily in memory. You can only become aware that this process is happening every moment you are awake. The unsettling truth is that availability heuristic does not simply make lies believable. It makes them feel like they have always been part of you. You grew up surrounded by messages that felt harmless at first. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Low-fat foods are healthier. Drinking 8 glasses of water every day is mandatory. These ideas sounded right because everyone repeated them, from teachers to commercials to health magazines. But did anyone ever tell you to question them? Did anyone pause to ask where these ideas came from, or whether they were based on fact? Most of the time, no one does, because repetition builds comfort, and comfort feels like truth. This is the trap we rarely see. A belief repeated often enough begins to pass unnoticed through our defenses. You are not born with skepticism. You learn what to question, And if no one around you questions a claim, why would you? This is where the availability heuristic silently enters the picture. The more often you encounter a piece of information, the easier it becomes to recall later. That mental ease creates the illusion of truth. It is not logic guiding your belief. It is familiarity, and familiarity is seductive. In dark psychology, this mechanism is one of the most reliable ways to bend perception. Lies do not always spread because they are convincing. They spread because they are repeated. Psychologists call this the illusory truth effect. When you hear a statement over and over, even without proof, your brain starts to treat it as trustworthy. A team of researchers led by Lisa Fazio at Vanderbilt University demonstrated this in 2015. Participants were more likely to believe false statements after hearing them several times, even when they originally knew the statements were untrue. The repetition overpowered their prior knowledge. This is not just theory. It is woven into everyday life. Marketing campaigns thrive on it. Think of slogans repeated so often they feel like facts. Political propaganda uses it to rally support for ideas that cannot survive scrutiny. Even in personal relationships, repetition shapes narratives. A partner who constantly insists they are the victim in every conflict may eventually convince you to doubt your own memory. The repetition does not change reality, but it changes how you recall reality. The danger is not only external, it lives inside your mind too. You repeat things to yourself. You remind yourself you are not good enough, that you always fail, that you never belong. Over time, those thoughts carve deep paths in your memory. They feel true, not because they are proven, but because they are familiar. You have rehearsed them silently for years. The availability heuristic thrives on patterns like this. It does not ask for evidence. It rewards repetition. And when an idea is repeated widely across a community or culture, it becomes even harder to resist. You look around and see agreement everywhere. Everyone believes it. How could they all be wrong? This is the quiet weight of collective lies. They do not shout. They whisper in unison until the whisper feels like the voice reason. If you never learn to challenge these mental shortcuts, they guide every decision you make. They influence how you see yourself, how you judge others, how you understand the world. Repetition is subtle. It does not fight you. It simply waits until you stop noticing it is there. The real danger is not that someone might tell you a lie. It is that you might live inside it without ever realizing. You have likely heard the phrase availability heuristic in passing, but most people do not realize how deeply it influences their thinking. At its core, this heuristic is a mental shortcut. Instead of carefully weighing every piece of information you encounter, your brain takes the fastest route. It relies on examples that are easiest to recall. If something comes to mind quickly, you assume it must be important, frequent, or true. This mental habit saves time, but it also leaves you vulnerable to serious mistakes. The mechanism is simple. The easier it is to retrieve a memory, the more weight your brain gives it. If you have recently heard about shark attacks, you overestimate how likely they are to happen. If you see constant news about plane crashes, you begin to feel unsafe about flying, even though statistically driving a car is far more dangerous. It is not reality guiding you. It is recall, and recall is often biased by repetition, emotion, and vivid imagery, rather than evidence. This shortcut evolved for survival. In prehistoric environments, your ancestors did not have time to analyze every situation carefully. If they repeatedly saw a predator near a watering hole, they avoided it. Familiar patterns signaled danger, and quick judgments kept them alive. In today's world, however, the same instinct is triggered by headlines, rumors, and social media trends. The repetition of information, even false information, hijacks the very system that once protected you. Psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, pioneers in behavioral economics, explored this phenomenon in their research. During the 1970s, they discovered that when people were asked to estimate the frequency of events, They relied heavily on how easily examples came to mind. When asked whether words beginning with the letter K are more common than words with K as the third letter, most people wrongly assumed the first option was more frequent, simply because examples were easier to recall. This experiment revealed a profound truth. Your judgments are not based on statistics or facts, but on mental shortcuts shaped by memory. The availability heuristic also ties directly into the illusory truth effect, where repetition alone increases perceived truth. A study by Lynn Hesher, David Goldstein, and Thomas Topino in the late 1970s showed that repeated statements, even when flagged as false, were later remembered as true. Modern research confirms the same effect. In 2015, Lisa Fazio and her team demonstrated that repeated exposure to misinformation increased belief in its accuracy, even for people who initially knew better. Repetition quietly overpowers reason. Daily life provides endless examples. Consider health myths. People still believe that low-fat foods are always healthier, or that eating late at night automatically leads to weight gain. Neither claim is universally true, yet they persist because they have been repeated in advertisements, fitness magazines, and casual conversations for decades. Or think about how fruit juice is marketed as nature's purest drink. Few mention the sugar content rivaling soda. These beliefs survive not because they are carefully examined, but because they are constantly reinforced. The availability heuristic is not always harmful. It allows quick decisions in emergencies and reduces mental strain in daily choices. But when combined with dark psychology, it becomes dangerous. Those who understand this mechanism can exploit it. Propagandists, marketers, and manipulators repeat selective messages until they become ingrained in your memory. You begin to feel that you came to the conclusion yourself, when in reality it was planted by relentless repetition. This is why questioning what feels familiar is so difficult. Familiarity breeds comfort. It feels safer to accept what you have heard before, rather than challenge it. Yet the comfort of familiarity is exactly what allows lies to thrive. To fully understand the weight of availability heuristic, you must recognize how it does not simply affect surface-level decisions, but shapes entire worldviews. It influences your fears, your trust in authority, and even the stories you tell yourself about who you are. If a certain narrative is easy to recall, you treat it as evidence, even if it is incomplete or misleading. This is why people overestimate crime rates after constant media coverage, or why they believe certain social groups are more dangerous or dishonest than others, simply because negative examples are repeated far more often than positive ones. Consider this in the context of personal relationships. When someone repeatedly tells you that you are selfish, or lazy, or ungrateful, those words eventually echo inside you. The more you hear them, the more vivid the memory becomes, and the more likely you are to mistake that repetition for proof. It is not single accusation that harms you. It is the constant repetition that makes the accusation feel undeniable. This is why emotional abuse so often leaves deeper scars than physical harm. Lies repeated about you become the truth you believe about yourself. The same process happens on a cultural level. Entire nations have been swayed by repeated messages that painted enemies as monsters, leaders as saviors, or harmful practices as noble traditions. During wartime propaganda campaigns, for example, governments did not rely on convincing people with logic. They relied on relentless repetition of slogans, posters, and speeches until the population could not imagine an alternative narrative. These campaigns worked not because people lacked intelligence, but because the human brain is wired to equate repetition with reliability. Modern technology has magnified this effect. Algorithms on social media platforms are designed to show you content you engage with, creating echo chambers that repeat the same ideas until they dominate your mental landscape. If you watch a video about a conspiracy theory, the algorithm feeds you 10 more. If you read one misleading health claim, you will soon see dozens. Without realizing it, your perception of what is normal and what is true begins to shift. The repetition is invisible, yet it changes everything. Understanding this heuristic also requires acknowledging why it feels so convincing. The human brain craves cognitive ease. When something is easy to process, it feels more believable. Repetition creates that ease. The first time you hear a claim, you might doubt it. The second time, it feels less strange. The third time, it feels familiar. By the 10th time, it feels obvious. Familiarity is mistaken for fact, and doubt fades not because of evidence, but because of comfort. The danger lies in how subtle this process is. You rarely notice it happening. You simply wake up one day and hold beliefs you never consciously chose. You assume they are yours because they feel so natural, but they were shaped by exposure, not reason. This is why availability heuristic is such a powerful tool in dark psychology. It bypasses debate and plants seeds directly into your memory. Once planted, those seeds grow quietly, shaping judgment long after the original message has been forgotten. The first step to defending yourself against this influence is awareness. The moment you realize that mental shortcuts govern much of your judgment, you begin to question not only what you believe, but why you believe it. That awareness does not erase the shortcut, but it gives you the ability to pause, to examine and to resist the automatic pull of repetition. And that pause, small as it seems, can be the difference between living in truth and living inside a carefully constructed illusion. When you hear the same message over and over, your brain does something remarkable, yet dangerous. It begins to process that message with less effort each time, and this effortless processing creates a sense of truth. Psychologists call this cognitive fluency. The smoother a piece of information feels when it enters your mind, the more believable it seems. It does not matter if the content is accurate. What matters is how easily it is recalled and how familiar it feels. This is the core of the availability heuristic, and it is why repetition is such a powerful trap. Think about common health claims. For decades, people were told that fat in food is bad, that low fat equals healthy, and that eating fat will make you fat. These statements were repeated everywhere, from packaging labels to diet books to morning talk shows. Few questioned them, and eventually they became accepted truths. Yet, modern nutrition research shows that certain fats are essential for health, and cutting them can even harm you. But the repeated message lingers, because memory does not update as easily as science does. This trap becomes even more dangerous when emotion is added to repetition. Emotional events, whether frightening or uplifting, stick in memory more vividly. When a message is repeated and paired with strong feelings, fear, anger, hope, it imprints deeper. This is why fear-based propaganda works so well. If a government or group repeatedly warns of an enemy, and each warning comes with shocking images or dire predictions, people begin to feel the threat as real even when evidence is scarce. Familiarity plus emotion creates a memory so strong that reason struggles to dislodge it. The human brain is wired to seek shortcuts because analyzing every detail of reality would be exhausting. Shortcuts save energy. They allow you to function without questioning every piece of information you encounter. But shortcuts also make you vulnerable. The availability heuristic is one of these shortcuts, and its danger lies in how quietly it operates. You rarely notice when you are using it, because it feels natural. You assume that what comes to mind easily must be correct. You confuse mental ease with truth. Repetition also creates an illusion of consensus. When you hear a claim from multiple sources, even if those sources are repeating the same origin, your brain interprets it as widespread agreement. This effect is amplified in the digital age, where the same piece of content is shared across countless accounts. You see it everywhere and conclude it must be universally accepted. The trap tightens. You are not just influenced by repetition, you are influenced by the appearance of collective belief. In dark psychology, these cognitive traps are exploited intentionally. Manipulators understand that people rarely verify information once it feels familiar. They know that fact-checking declines as repetition rises, because the human mind mistakes familiarity for evidence. By the time you pause to question a claim, you may already feel certain of it. Not because you investigated, but because you have heard it too many times to doubt. One of the most striking aspects of repetition is how it interacts with memory itself. The brain does not store every detail of reality. It compresses, edits, and reconstructs experiences each time you recall them. When a false statement is repeated, it begins to occupy the same mental space as genuine memories. Over time, your brain no longer distinguishes between what you witnessed and what you merely heard repeatedly. This is how false memories form, and why people can be absolutely certain about events that never occurred. Neuropsychology provides insight into why this happens. The hippocampus, a part of the brain central to memory formation, strengthens connections every time a memory is retrieved. Repetition reinforces those neural pathways, making them easier to access. The prefrontal cortex, which evaluates accuracy, cannot always keep up. The more a thought travels down the same neural path, the more automatic and convincing it feels. This is not just psychological, it is biological. Historical events reveal how powerful this process can be on a mass scale. During the Second World War, propaganda campaigns relied on relentless repetition of slogans and imagery. Citizens heard the same phrases daily through radio, posters, and speeches, until opposition felt not only dangerous but absurd. The repeated messages became cultural truths, resistant to evidence even after the war ended. This is not confined to the past. Modern political campaigns and advertising use similar tactics, repeating key phrases until they dominate public consciousness. On a personal level, repetition shapes your sense of identity. When you repeatedly tell yourself you are a failure, your brain begins to retrieve examples that confirm it. The availability heuristic ensures those memories are the first to surface, overshadowing any contradictory evidence. Over time, you internalize the narrative. You are not just told you are unworthy, you feel it. The repetition of self-criticism can be as damaging as lies from the outside world. This trap deepens in group settings, where social validation amplifies repetition. If you belong to a community where everyone repeats the same belief, challenging it feels like betrayal. The human need for belonging pushes you toward conformity. The repetition becomes a wall, keeping opposing views out and reinforcing the illusion of truth inside. Social media intensifies this, creating echo chambers where you hear the same views endlessly, mistaking their frequency for accuracy. The danger is that these traps do not announce themselves. They are quiet, invisible, and constant. You rarely recognize when your judgment has been shaped by repetition rather than reality. By the time you notice, the belief feels permanent, and when enough people share the same repeated belief, it becomes culture, policy, and sometimes even law. This is why understanding the availability heuristic is not optional. It is essential. Without awareness, you are not making independent choices. You are living in loops of repetition, mistaking familiarity for fact, and confusing the loudest voices for the truest ones. When repetition is used deliberately, it becomes one of the most dangerous tools in dark psychology. This is not just about harmless advertising or casual misinformation. It is about controlled narratives designed to reshape how you see reality itself. Skilled manipulators understand that they do not need to prove a claim. They only need to repeat it until your brain accepts it. Once the seed is planted, every repetition waters it, and soon it grows into belief without ever being questioned. Propaganda campaigns throughout history reveal this strategy clearly. During the rise of totalitarian regimes in the 20th century, governments repeated slogans daily across every medium. Citizens heard the same phrases on posters, in speeches, on the radio, and even in schools. These slogans were not complex arguments. They were short, emotional, and easy to memorize. The more they were repeated, the more familiar they felt. And familiarity, as research shows, creates a sense of truth. The population no longer asked whether the message was accurate. They simply accepted it because everyone else seemed to accept it too. This same principle is used today in subtler ways. Corporations rely on repeated advertising to create brand loyalty. A product name, repeated often enough, feels safer to choose. even when there is no real difference in quality. Politicians repeat talking points until they dominate headlines, forcing opponents to react rather than lead the conversation. On social media, misinformation spreads through constant shares and reposts, giving the illusion of credibility simply because it appears everywhere. Manipulators exploit the emotional layer of repetition as well. They know that fear is contagious and memorable. If they repeat a warning about danger often enough, you begin to feel it even when no evidence supports it. This is how conspiracy theories take root. A frightening claim, repeated across multiple platforms, gains emotional weight and begins to feel true simply because of how many times you have heard it. The scariest part is that manipulation does not require large-scale systems. It happens in personal relationships too. A controlling partner may repeat narratives to wear down your sense of reality. They may insist you are forgetful, selfish, or ungrateful until you start to internalize it. Over time, their repeated words become part of your own inner voice. You find yourself doubting your memory and apologizing for things you never did. This is psychological manipulation at its most intimate, and it works because your brain confuses repetition with evidence. In each of these cases, the manipulator relies on the same shortcut, the availability heuristic. They do not fight your logic directly. They bypass it by flooding your memory with repeated cues. And when those cues feel familiar, you stop questioning them. The repetition does not just spread the lie, it rewires your perception of truth itself. In the digital age, manipulation through repetition has become more efficient and more invisible than ever before. Social media platforms are designed to keep you engaged, feeding you content that aligns with what you already believe. The more you engage with a topic, the more similar content appears in your feed. Without realizing it, you enter an echo chamber where the same messages repeat across countless posts, comments, and videos. The repetition feels like consensus, and consensus feels like truth. It is no longer one voice trying to convince you. It is thousands of voices, all saying the same thing. This creates a psychological loop that is extremely difficult to break. Each repetition reinforces neural pathways in your brain, making those beliefs feel automatic and instinctive. Over time, the repeated idea becomes part of your identity. You do not just believe it, you defend it. This is why manipulative narratives are so resilient. Challenging them feels like an attack on who you are, rather than what you think. Marketers and propagandists exploit this with precision. They understand that one shocking statement will fade quickly, but a repeated message, even if less dramatic, will endure. A brand name mentioned casually in dozens of places sinks deeper than a single loud advertisement. A political slogan repeated quietly but consistently will outlast a complicated argument. Repetition is subtle, but its impact accumulates over time until it dominates your mental landscape. Even falsehoods exposed by fact-checkers can survive this way. Research shows that when a lie is repeated frequently, even corrections do not erase its impact. The original false claim remains easier to recall than the correction, leading people to believe it again later. This is known as the continued influence effect. Dark psychology takes advantage of this weakness, ensuring that a falsehood repeated often enough will continue to influence behavior long after it has been debunked. Personal manipulation follows the same pattern. A toxic friend or partner may repeat certain phrases about your flaws, your failures, or your supposed shortcomings until you adopt them as self-descriptions. These repeated narratives undermine confidence and create dependency. You start seeking reassurance from the very person who planted the harmful belief, trapping you in a cycle of control. In every case, the principle remains the same. Repetition bypasses reason. It does not argue with you. It simply surrounds you until questioning it feels impossible. Once familiar, even a lie can feel like an old friend. And that is why availability heuristic is so dangerous when placed in the hands of those who understand how to use it. Memory feels personal. It feels like proof of who you are and what you have experienced. Yet memory is not a perfect recording. It is flexible, reconstructive, and deeply influenced by repetition. When the same false message is repeated to you, it does not merely sit outside of you, it begins to alter the memories you carry inside. Over time, you may remember things differently, or even recall events that never happened. This is how lies become part of your identity. One of the most studied phenomena in psychology is the misinformation effect, first explored by Elizabeth Loftus. Her experiments showed how easily people's memories could be altered simply by introducing misleading information after an event. In one study, participants watched a car accident and were later asked about it. When the word smashed was used instead of hit, participants remembered broken glass that never existed. Their memories had been reshaped by subtle cues. Now imagine how repetition amplifies this effect. A single suggestion can mislead, but a repeated suggestion can overwrite. This is why dark psychology does not just rely on shocking lies, it relies on persistent ones. When someone repeats a narrative about you, whether that you are careless, weak, or incapable, your memory starts to adapt. You begin to recall examples that confirm the claim, even if they are exaggerated or irrelevant. The more you recall them, the more solid they feel. Eventually, the false narrative merges with your personal story, and it feels like it has always been true. Consider a child constantly told they are not smart. At first, they may resist, but as the message repeats, they start to interpret every mistake as proof. The memory of being scolded in school grows larger than memories of success. By adulthood, they carry a belief in their own inadequacy, not because of evidence, but because repetition sculpted their self-perception. This also happens with cultural myths. Many people believe fruit juice is inherently healthy because of repeated marketing from childhood. Decades of commercials and family habits built a memory structure around that idea. Even when shown evidence of its high sugar content, people often resist changing their minds. The repeated narrative has merged with their personal experiences, such as childhood breakfasts and comforting family routines, making the myth feel real at a deeper level than simple facts can reach. Repetition can even plant entirely false memories. In some experiments, participants were convinced they had been lost in a shopping mall as children, despite no such event occurring. Through repeated suggestions and guided imagination, they began to visualize the event and even describe sensory details. This demonstrates how repetition interacts with imagination to create memories of things that never happened. The most disturbing part is that false memories do not feel false. They feel as authentic as real ones. Once repetition reshapes memory, there is no internal alarm that warns you of the change. You believe you are recalling truth, when in fact you are recalling a repeated narrative. Once repetition takes hold of memory, breaking free becomes one of the most difficult psychological challenges you will face. The longer a false narrative remains unchallenged, the more it integrates into your identity. It stops feeling like something you learned. It starts feeling like something you always knew. This is why people cling to childhood myths well into adulthood, and why harmful self-beliefs feel impossible to shake off. The lie does not simply live in your mind, it becomes part of who you think you are. Over time, repeated false messages create self-deception. You begin to unconsciously search for evidence that supports the repeated belief, while ignoring information that contradicts it. This confirmation bias reinforces the cycle. If you have been told for years that you are forgetful, every small lapse becomes proof, while moments of competence fade into the background. The repetition does not just change what you remember, it changes what you pay attention to, what you prioritize, and what you allow yourself to accept as reality. The psychological harm of this process can be devastating. People raised on repeated criticism often carry deep feelings of inadequacy, even in the absence of current mistreatment. Survivors of emotional manipulation report years of battling internal voices that echo the words of abusers. Even when logically aware that the messages were false, the emotional imprint lingers. Logic does not erase repetition. Emotional memories hold a different kind of power, one that persists even when facts have changed. Breaking this cycle requires more than simply hearing the truth. It requires actively challenging and replacing the repeated falsehoods with equally persistent truths. This is why therapy often focuses on rewriting inner narratives. It takes repeated, consistent effort to create new mental patterns strong enough to compete with the old ones. Without repetition of healthier beliefs, the mind tends to default back to what feels familiar, even when familiar is harmful. The difficulty is magnified in environments that continue reinforcing the false narrative. A person trying to overcome years of criticism cannot fully heal if they remain surrounded by voices repeating the same lies. The human mind is shaped not only by its own thoughts, but also by the echoes of others. To rewrite memory, you must change both the internal and external patterns that keep the lie alive. The most unsettling reality is this: even when you become aware of the manipulation, traces of the repeated lie remain. Awareness is the first step, but it does not erase the pathways that have already formed in the brain. Those pathways will always be easier to access, and under stress, the mind often reverts to them. This is why recovery is rarely a clean break. It is a process of constant vigilance, catching yourself when old narratives resurface, and choosing again and again to question them. Human beings rarely exist in isolation. From the moment you are born, you are surrounded by family, culture, and community, each carrying shared beliefs that shape how you see the world. Many of these beliefs are not questioned, not because they are necessarily true, but because everyone around you accepts them as truth. This is the foundation of social proof, the psychological phenomenon where you assume something must be correct if enough people believe it. When repetition enters this equation, collective lies can spread rapidly and become almost impossible to dismantle. Consider how easily myths spread through communities. For years, entire societies believed that low-fat foods were the healthiest option simply because health authorities, advertisers, and even family members repeated it. It was not just one message from one source. It was the same message reinforced from every direction, repeated over breakfast tables, classroom lessons, and magazine covers. By the time science challenged it, the belief had already taken root across generations. The repetition transformed opinion into culture. The availability heuristic magnifies this effect. When you repeatedly hear a claim from multiple people, your mind equates frequency with consensus. Consensus feels like confirmation, even when everyone is simply repeating the same falsehood. This is why collective lies feel so solid. It is not only your memory being shaped, it is the memory of the entire group, echoing back and forth until it drowns out dissenting voices. History offers striking examples of this. During mass hysteria events like the Salem witch trials, fear and rumor were repeated so relentlessly that entire communities believed innocent people were dangerous. Social proof combined with repetition turns suspicion into certainty. Once a lie reaches this scale, it becomes self-sustaining. People stop asking for proof and instead police anyone who dares to question the narrative. Modern society faces similar risks, amplified by technology. Social media algorithms prioritize content that gets attention, which often means content that is repeated and shared widely. Misinformation travels faster than corrections because it is more engaging, more emotional, and more frequently seen. When you encounter the same false narrative across multiple platforms, it begins to feel omnipresent. You are not simply misled by one source. You are immersed in a sea of repetition, where unverified claims masquerade as truth, simply because everyone seems to be talking about them. The psychological weight of collective lies is profound. Once a belief is shared by enough people, questioning it feels dangerous. You risk ridicule, isolation, even hostility. Humans crave belonging, and belonging often means adopting the repeated beliefs of the group. Over time, the need to fit in overrides the need for accuracy. The collective lie becomes a social glue, holding the group together, even at the expense of truth. The influence of social proof becomes most dangerous when repeated lies move beyond personal perception and become part of cultural identity. Once a belief is tied to a group's values, challenging it feels like betrayal. People stop asking if the belief is true and start defending it as if defending their family, their traditions, or their very way of life. The repetition no longer just convinces individuals, it unites them under a shared illusion, making the lie harder to dismantle without dismantling the community itself. This phenomenon explains why cultural myths endure even when evidence contradicts them. For decades, the idea that breakfast is the most important meal of the day was promoted through relentless advertising campaigns by cereal companies. That message became so ingrained that questioning it felt absurd. It was not just a belief about food, it was a belief about what a good parent does for their children each morning. Cultural repetition transformed marketing into morality, and morality is rarely challenged. Collective lies gain strength from the way humans process risk and reward. When everyone around you believes something, the cost of doubting it feels high. If you are wrong, you risk rejection or ridicule. If you are right, you gain little more than personal clarity. This imbalance keeps many people silent. They conform outwardly even if doubts linger privately. Over time, the silence of doubters reinforces the appearance of consensus, creating a feedback loop where the lie seems stronger than it really is. Social media intensifies this effect by compressing time and space. A rumor that once took weeks to spread through a town now circulates the globe in hours. The constant repetition across platforms creates the illusion of overwhelming agreement. You see hundreds of posts echoing the same message and assume it must be true. The algorithm rewards content that provokes strong emotions, meaning that shocking lies are repeated more than quiet truths. This collective repetition also reshapes memory. At a societal level, generations may inherit narratives that were never accurate, but have been told so often they become part of national history. Cultural myths about heroism, villainy, or moral superiority persist because questioning them threatens collective identity. When these myths are challenged, people often experience intense discomfort, a form of collective cognitive dissonance. It is easier to defend the lie than to face the unsettling truth. The ethical implications are profound. If repetition can turn falsehoods into widely accepted truths, what responsibility do individuals and institutions have to verify what they repeat? And what happens to societies built on narratives that were never true in the first place? These questions are uncomfortable because they force us to examine not only the lies we believe, but the lies we help spread. The most dangerous aspect of collective lies is not their scale, but their invisibility. When everyone repeats the same message, it stops feeling like propaganda and starts feeling like reality. At that point, the lie no longer needs to be defended. It has already won. Understanding that your brain relies on shortcuts is the first step, but knowing is not the same as undoing. The availability heuristic operates automatically, outside of your conscious control. You cannot simply tell yourself to stop believing repeated lies. If the repetition has shaped your memory and perception, the belief feels natural, even after you learn it might be false. Breaking this mental shortcut requires deliberate effort, patience, and strategies that replace automatic thinking with conscious questioning. One of the most powerful tools to disrupt repetition is slowing down your thought process. Most false beliefs rooted in availability heuristic survive because you do not pause to evaluate them. They feel familiar, and familiarity tricks you into trusting them. When you deliberately slow down, you create space to analyze the source of your beliefs. Ask yourself, where did I first hear this? How often have I heard it? Has it ever been proven? Or is it just repeated? This form of metacognition, thinking about your own thinking, turns an automatic reaction into a conscious choice. Exposure to diverse information is another critical step. If repetition is what traps you, variety is what frees you. Seek out perspectives that challenge your beliefs, even when it feels uncomfortable. This does not mean blindly accepting the opposite view. It means weighing multiple viewpoints to see where they align and where they conflict. By introducing variety, you weaken the illusion of consensus created by repeated lies. Fact-checking is essential, yet it must be approached carefully. People often assume they can simply look up the truth and erase falsehoods. But repeated lies do not disappear so easily. Research shows that even when presented with corrections, people may still recall the original lie because it was heard more often. This is known as the continued influence effect. The solution is not just finding the truth once, but reinforcing it repeatedly. Truth, like lies, requires repetition to stay alive in memory. Emotional awareness plays a significant role in breaking the shortcut. Repetition often works because it is tied to emotion, especially fear or anger. When you feel an intense emotional reaction to repeated information, pause and ask whether the emotion is clouding your judgment. Are you responding to evidence, or to how many times you have heard the message? By separating emotion from evaluation, you can begin to see the repeated lie for what it is. Applying these strategies to daily life begins with recognizing where repetition hides. Look at the beliefs you hold about health, success, relationships, or even morality, and trace them back to their origins. If a belief exists because you have simply heard it over and over, it deserves closer examination. For example, if you assume fruit juice is always healthy, ask yourself where that belief started. Was it in family routines, advertising slogans, or cultural habits? Once you uncover the source, you can begin to evaluate its accuracy rather than accept it blindly. Breaking repetition also requires replacing harmful narratives with new, constructive ones. This is not about forcing yourself to adopt the opposite belief overnight. It is about gradual reconditioning. If you have repeated to yourself that you are not capable, you must intentionally repeat a more balanced truth until it gains the same familiarity. Consistency is crucial. Positive truths must be repeated as often as the lies you are trying to undo. Real-world examples show how this works. Cognitive behavioral therapy often focuses on challenging distorted thoughts and practicing alternative perspectives. A person struggling with repeated self-criticism learns to document evidence of their strengths, revisiting those reminders daily until new mental pathways form. Over time, this repetition of truth begins to feel as natural as the lie once did. The key is persistence. Lies are not erased by one moment of clarity. They are replaced through deliberate, repeated correction. Awareness of repetition's influence also helps protect you from external manipulation. When you notice a claim appearing everywhere, pause before assuming it must be accurate. Ask who benefits from the claim being repeated and why it spreads so widely. This habit of questioning turns you from a passive receiver of information into an active evaluator of truth. It is not cynicism, it is defense. Perhaps most importantly, breaking free requires accepting discomfort. Questioning repeated lies often isolates you from groups that still believe them. You may feel resistance, even hostility, from people who cling to the familiar. This is a natural part of the process. Truth rarely spreads as quickly as falsehood because truth demands effort. Yet choosing awareness over comfort is what separates independent thinking from blind conformity. The path to freeing yourself from repetition is not easy, but it is transformative. Once you begin to see the patterns, you cannot unsee them. You recognize how many of your old beliefs were built on familiarity rather than fact. And while this realization can be unsettling, it is also liberating. You are no longer living in a loop. You are choosing what to believe. Confronting the lies you have carried for years is not a comfortable process. It forces you to examine beliefs you may have built your identity around. Beliefs that influence every decision you make without you ever realizing it. These are not harmless misunderstandings about small details. They are deeply rooted narratives about what is good, what is bad, what is safe, and what is dangerous. They affect how you trust others, how you see yourself, and how you interpret the world around you. Facing them requires more than curiosity. It requires courage, because it often feels like dismantling a part of yourself. Start by observing the beliefs that feel automatic. Do you believe that breakfast must always be eaten to start the day right? Do you believe that low fat equals healthy, or that sugar is only bad if it comes from candy, but not from juice? Do you believe that people who disagree with you are misinformed, while those who agree must be enlightened? These thoughts may feel obvious, but the important question is why they feel obvious. Have you tested them against evidence, or have you simply heard them repeated so many times that doubting them never felt necessary? The availability heuristic thrives in this silence. Repetition hides in plain sight, building layers of familiarity until belief feels inevitable. It does not shout. It whispers in family traditions, in advertising slogans, in political speeches, in casual conversations with friends. Over time, these whispers combine to form the soundtrack of your inner world. By the time you notice it, the belief already feels like part of your memory. That is why confronting it can feel like betraying yourself. You are not only challenging what you were told, you are challenging what you have accepted as your own voice. The process begins with awareness, and awareness begins with writing. Write down the things you believe most strongly about the world and about yourself. Do not filter or justify, simply list them. Then, beside each belief, write where it came from. Did you see it with your own eyes? Did you verify it with reliable evidence? Or did you absorb it from repetition, from hearing it everywhere and assuming that meant it must be true? This exercise is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. It reveals how much of what you know may be borrowed, inherited, or imposed, rather than discovered. Personal lies are rarely isolated. They are reinforced by collective lies. If everyone around you repeats the same narrative, you feel pressure to conform. This pressure is not always loud or explicit. Sometimes it is subtle, felt in the silence when you question something others accept. You hesitate to speak up because you sense the weight of the group's certainty. Many people choose silence rather than risk ridicule or rejection. The repetition continues unchallenged, and the lie becomes even stronger. To confront it often means standing apart from the crowd, which is why so few attempt it. The most difficult lies to face are the ones about yourself. When you have been told you are not good enough, not smart enough, not deserving of love, and you repeat those words internally for years, they stop sounding like someone else's opinion. They start sounding like your own truth. You collect memories that support the lie and forget moments that contradict it. Confronting these lies means dismantling years of self-perception, which can feel frightening but is also deeply liberating. The first step in breaking these lies is not to replace them instantly with new beliefs. It is to sit with the discomfort of uncertainty, to acknowledge that what you thought was solid ground may not be. Only by doing this can you begin rebuilding on a foundation that is based on truth rather than repetition. This process is slow, sometimes painful, but it is the only way to regain control over what you truly believe. Once you begin confronting the repeated lies that have shaped your thinking, you encounter a unique form of emotional resistance. It is not only about accepting that a belief was wrong, it is about realizing how long you lived under its influence. This realization often triggers anger, shame, or grief. Anger at those who spread the lie, shame at yourself for believing it, grief for the time lost following something untrue. These emotions are heavy, yet they are also a sign of growth. They mean you are seeing reality more clearly than before. The cost of this clarity is high. When you begin questioning long-held beliefs, you may face backlash from those who still hold them. Friends and family might resist your change because it disrupts the comfort of shared illusions. You may feel isolated, as if you no longer belong where you once felt at home. This is why many people abandon the process and return to the familiar comfort of repetition. Confronting lies is not only about personal courage, it is about preparing for the loneliness that can follow truth. There is also the unsettling realization that the lies you confront externally often mirror lies you tell yourself. Perhaps you have repeated to yourself that you are not capable of change, or that you do not deserve better relationships, or that your failures define your future. These internal narratives can be just as damaging as cultural myths. The difference is that they echo in your mind constantly, unchallenged, becoming the default soundtrack of your thoughts. Breaking them requires constant awareness and deliberate replacement with healthier truths. One way to begin is through deliberate exposure to uncomfortable truths. Seek out evidence that challenges your assumptions rather than confirms them. This can feel threatening at first, because it destabilizes what you thought you knew. Yet it is in this discomfort that genuine growth happens. As you gather new information, you start to see patterns you missed before. You begin to recognize how repetition shaped you and how easily it can shape others. The most transformative step comes when you share this awareness. Speaking openly about the lies you have confronted not only helps you solidify new beliefs, but also invites others to question their own. When you break the silence, you disrupt the cycle of repetition. Every time you choose to challenge a lie, even quietly, you weaken its hold on those around you. Change does not always begin with grand declarations. Often it starts with small, private acts of honesty that ripple outward. By the time you reach this point, you will notice a shift. You no longer accept every repeated claim as truth. You begin to see the patterns, the slogans, the familiar phrases that once guided you without question. And although confronting these lies can feel like losing part of yourself, in reality, it is the moment you start reclaiming your mind. Recognizing the lies that repetition has planted in your mind is not a moment of celebration. It is a moment of reckoning. Truth carries weight. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. This awareness reshapes not only your understanding of the world, but also your relationship with the people and systems around you. Many imagine that discovering truth brings immediate freedom, yet the reality is far more complicated. It often brings discomfort, alienation, and a burden you did not anticipate. The first cost is personal. When you realize that certain beliefs you held for years were false, you begin to question your own judgment. You wonder how you could have accepted them so easily. This self-doubt can feel paralyzing. It forces you to revisit past decisions and reinterpret events through a new lens. Relationships, career choices, even your sense of identity may feel unstable. If you believed, for instance, that fruit juice was always healthy, or that success must follow a single path, and now you see the flaws in those beliefs, you cannot help but reconsider how much of your life has been guided by repetition rather than reason. This awareness also disrupts belonging. Many of the lies you confront are not just personal, they are collective. They are held by your family, your peers, your culture. Challenging them creates tension. People are rarely grateful when you question what they consider obvious. Instead, they may label you as difficult, rebellious, or even dangerous. Belief systems are social glue. When you step outside of them, you risk being treated as an outsider. The comfort of community often depends on shared illusions, and truth can make you feel profoundly alone. Another cost is cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort of holding conflicting truths. Even after you learn the truth, the repeated lie may still feel familiar and safe. You know it is false, yet it lingers in memory. A part of you continues to react to it as if it were true. This split creates ongoing tension. In moments of stress or fatigue, your mind may even revert to the old narrative, proving just how deep repetition can carve into thought. There is also an emotional toll. Truth is rarely neutral. It can be unsettling, even painful. To learn that a comforting belief was false can trigger grief, as if mourning something you never truly had. To see manipulation where you once saw guidance can spark anger and betrayal. These emotions are healthy responses to deception, but they add to the burden of awakening. You must process not only what you learned, but what you lost in learning it. On a societal level, the cost of truth awareness is equally heavy. Those who challenge repeated lies often face resistance from institutions invested in maintaining them. Whistleblowers, reformers, and truth-tellers throughout history have endured isolation, persecution, or worse. The availability heuristic works in favor of those in power. If enough people repeat a narrative, challenging it becomes dangerous, not because the challenge is wrong, but because it disrupts stability. Yet despite the weight, this awareness carries profound value. Seeing the patterns allows you to break free from them. You begin to notice how repetition shapes public opinion, how marketing influences desire, how cultural myths become moral codes. This insight does not make you immune to manipulation, but it gives you tools to resist it. Awareness does not erase vulnerability, but it sharpens perception. There is a quiet cost as well, the loneliness of seeing what others do not. Once you understand how repetition builds false truths, conversations may feel different. You hear the slogans in casual talk, the recycled phrases in debates, the borrowed opinions in arguments. What once felt like normal conversation now sounds like echoes. The distance between you and those who remain unquestioning can feel vast. But awareness also opens the door to something rare, authentic choice. Before, repetition made choices for you. Now you can pause, you can examine, you can decide what to believe rather than inherit beliefs unconsciously. This does not guarantee certainty, but it offers freedom, and freedom, though heavy, is worth carrying. The cost of truth awareness is real. It asks you to give up comfort, to endure isolation, to confront painful realizations about yourself and others. Yet in paying this cost, you gain something priceless. You gain the ability to live with your eyes open, to recognize manipulation before it roots itself in your memory, and to choose a life guided by deliberate truth rather than convenient illusion. The world will not reward you for this awareness. It rarely does. But if you can hold on to it, if you can bear the discomfort it brings, you will find clarity where others see only noise. And in that clarity, you will find the quiet strength to keep questioning, even when the answers unsettle you. Every repeated lie leaves you at a crossroads. You can choose to continue accepting what is familiar, finding comfort in the safety of consensus, or you can choose to awaken, knowing that awakening will change how you see everything. The availability heuristic will not disappear simply because you understand it. The mental shortcut is hardwired into your brain. The difference is that now you can see it working. You can feel when familiarity starts to disguise itself as truth. That awareness creates a choice you never had before. Choosing to awaken is not a dramatic moment of defiance. It is a quiet, personal decision made over and over again. It begins with small pauses in your thinking. When a claim feels obvious, you stop and ask why. When a belief feels universal, you wonder who benefits from its universality. When a memory feels vivid, you ask whether it was shaped by experience or by repetition. This practice of questioning slowly dismantles the grip of false familiarity and replaces it with deliberate understanding. The alternative is easier. Remaining blind to repetition requires no effort. It allows you to live in harmony with the familiar voices around you, to accept what is handed to you without friction or discomfort. It is a tempting path, especially in a world where challenging narratives can isolate you. Yet blindness comes at a cost. It leaves you vulnerable to manipulation, trapped in cycles of belief you did not choose, convinced by the loudest echoes rather than the clearest truths. Awakening carries its own burdens. It means seeing how repetition has shaped your past, how many of your convictions were planted rather than discovered, and how easily even intelligent people can be swayed by the comfort of hearing the same words again and again. This realization can feel heavy, almost unbearable at first, but it is also the doorway to clarity. When you awaken, you gain control over what you allow to repeat in your life. You become deliberate about the voices you trust, the ideas you share, and the memories you strengthen. There is no single moment when awakening is complete. It is an ongoing process of noticing, questioning, and choosing. Some days you will fall back into old patterns, believing something because it feels familiar. Other days you will pause, breathe, and challenge it. Over time, the pauses become longer, the questioning becomes natural, and the lies lose their hold. You cannot undo every repeated narrative, but you can stop feeding them. As you stand at this crossroads, ask yourself quietly, how many of your beliefs are yours, and how many are echoes? How many truths would remain if you stripped away everything you accepted, simply because you heard it too many times? The answer will not come all at once. It will unfold slowly, each time you catch yourself questioning what once felt unquestionable. If this realization unsettles you, it should. It means you are beginning to see the patterns. It means you are noticing what most people never will. The discomfort you feel is the first sign of freedom, the first sign that repetition no longer controls you. Carry this awareness forward, share it with someone who needs it. Challenge the lies that have shaped your world, and invite others to do the same. If you found value in this journey, consider supporting it in simple ways, by liking, subscribing, and passing it on to someone whose mind might be ready to awaken. Not because repetition demands it, but because the truth deserves to be heard at least once. And as you step away from this moment, remember, the loudest voice in the room is rarely the truest. The truth is quiet. It waits for those willing to hear beyond the echo.